Don't miss this year's AUVSI Exponential in Orlando, Florida on April 25th through the 28th. It's the largest global gathering for the drone and uncrewed systems industry, and you're going to want to be a part of it. Go to exponential.org for more information and to register.
We need to now validate that a certain set of communications, navigation, and surveillance requirements, when met, meet the safety case for a detect and avoid solution.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 355. What's involved in performing validation and testing of BVLOS and safety protocols? For that question, we turn to Andy Thurling, Chief Technology Officer of the Northeast UAS Airspace Integration Research Alliance. Newware, as it is commonly known, is a New York-based nonprofit with a mission to safely integrate uncrewed aircraft systems into the national airspace, enabling scalable, economically viable commercial drone operations. Newware manages operations of the FAA-designated UAS test site at Griffiss International Airport in Rome, New York, and is responsible for advancing New York's 50-mile UAS Corridor between Rome and Syracuse. Andy leads technical research on current and future UAS technologies. He also evaluates potential paths to implementation, industry standards for approval by regulators, and test techniques to verify compliance. Prior to Newware, Andy was Director of Product Safety and Mission Assurance at AeroVironment, where he led airworthiness, certification, and airspace access strategic efforts. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Andy talks about NUAIR, the current efforts in testing BVLOS protocols, and validation of safety standards for UAS systems. We also talk about this year's Exponential 2022 conference in Orlando and why we all should attend. But before we hear from Andy, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn about the Northeast UAS Airspace Integration Research Alliance and its efforts to validate BVLOS and safety standards. Let's pick up the interview where I ask Andy to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, my name's Andy Thurling. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Newware. We are the technical managers for the New York UAS test site, one of the 7 FAA UAS test sites. And we are also the I guess you would say technology enablers for the use of unmanned systems for economic benefit of Central New York and beyond.
Andy, can you give us a brief overview of the FAA test sites?
Well, I think the test sites originally were designed to enable the FAA to have an area where there could be these, I guess you would call them sandboxes, where people could go and safely test unmanned aircraft and other technologies, and basically enable the integration of those unmanned aircraft into the national airspace safely and efficiently. So they were basically those areas where people went to go and try out their latest and greatest stuff.
How long has Newware been in operation?
Let's see, I think we were chosen in 2014, 2015 timeframe, and the test site has evolved over the last 7 or so years to what it is today, where we now have a 50-mile corridor instrumented with radars and ADS-B receivers and multilateration systems so that we can get very good visibility on manned aircraft and unmanned aircraft to some extent in the airspace. And we now have a 35-mile stretch of beyond visual line of sight approval. We didn't start that way. That was a long time coming, and we've worked with the FAA over the years to make that happen.
Who can use the corridor and for what purposes?
The certificate of waiver authorization that we have now is for public aircraft operations, which is basically for flight research. So anybody that came out to test with us would need to be doing it as part of the test site. They would not be just doing it as a civil operation. Our intention is to use the permissions that we have now to do research and to basically validate the performance requirements that would be necessary for someone to get a civil waiver to go and do the same thing that we're doing with the public aircraft COA for BVLOS. And so the goal is to do just what you said, that people would be able to come up and fly beyond visual line of sight. We're not there yet. We're still in the research phase, trying to validate those performance requirements.
What's the approach or the methodology that's going to be used to conduct the test?
Basically, what we're trying to prove is that the concept of operations that we have described for what we're calling more of a local beyond visual line of sight, which is it's not a beyond visual line of sight that is just going anywhere. It is a beyond visual line of sight in a well-described area, an area that you would know where the obstacles were, where the safe places to land were, what your communications coverage was. You wouldn't need to have as we would say in the UTM nomenclature, a supplemental data service provider that gave all of that data to you. You would know it because you're able to study it. You don't need a supplemental data service provider to tell you where the towers are. You can go out and measure the tower that's in the area that you are defining as this local beyond visual line of sight area. And we've done this. And so we need to now validate that a certain set of communications, navigation, and surveillance requirements, when met, meet the safety case for a detect and avoid solution. Because essentially what it boils down to for these beyond visual line of sight COAs is that you are trying to come up with an equivalent level of safety or an alternate means of compliance to the see and avoid requirement that is typically on manned aircraft. And you might hear it referred to as 91-113. That's the see and avoid requirement. So we have to show an acceptable means of compliance to the FAA to do just that. And we believe that we have got that and defined that in our concept of operations for this local beyond visual line of sight. And that involves testing out the communication latency and reliability, testing out the aircraft's navigation capability and its ability to move out of the way, and the surveillance that is supplied by our radars. We've measured that, so we know what the accuracy and latency of that is. And so when you tie them all together, you need to show that they meet the safety case. And so we're intending on doing that. And then when you have a civil applicant come up to fly with us, they don't need to go and make the whole safety case. Safety case is already made. They need to show that their communications link meets the communications requirements. They need to show that their airplane meets the navigation requirements. And we know what the surveillance requirements already are. And so you take them all together and you meet the safety case. So that should be a very streamlined way for them to obtain a waiver from the FAA to do truly civil operations. So that's it in a nutshell.
What are the limitations of the study?
It's not as wide-ranging and as flexible as somebody might need to go and do a delivery from a store to any place, to anyone's home. But it's flexible enough that you'd be able to go from store to store or from store to distribution center because it's a known route. I hate to say crawl, walk, run because it's getting very tired. It's not visual line of sight. It's not full up anywhere you want to fly beyond visual line of sight. It is a more constrained beyond visual line of sight, but still we believe that it's going to have significant economic potential.
Will the drones be capable of analyzing the data in real time?
I think that, initially what we're looking at it as being more of a static kind of a evaluation of the ground and the air that you're flying through. There are many people who have proposed those more automated methods, but they are more future focused. I mean, we're having a trouble now with getting approvals just to do even rudimentary beyond visual line of sight. And some of those is really due to the difficulties that the regulators are having with how to certify automation or autonomy, and specifically AI and machine learning. So to add that in is going to be, I think, an unnecessarily complex wrinkle right now, and that we'd be satisfied with getting those kind of some form of commercially viable beyond visual line of sight, point-to-point cargo type operation, or a linear infrastructure inspection enabled.
The Newware test site is also involved in testing the adoption of 5G for drones. What's that about?
There's a consortium that is being led by MITRE. It's called the OpenGen Consortium. And it's a group of companies that have come together to work to investigate and research how 5G technologies can be used in unmanned systems. So we're part of that. And as part of that, we're establishing a section of this corridor that I described of beyond visual line of sight. We are instrumenting that with some base stations that are 5G radios. And so we're going to have a section of beyond visual line of sight corridor covered by the 5G private network. And we'll be able to use that for research. And we'll be looking at things like the use of, people always think of 5G for the command and control link. Of course, we're going to be looking at it for command and control link, but there are other things that 5G might be able to enable, like detect and avoid and some other kind of capabilities. We might find them very useful in unmanned systems. So that section of the BVLOS corridor is going to allow us to do some research in that area.
Can you give us a status of the project?
We are installing the systems now. It is winter in New York, so we have had to contend with snow and things of that nature, but we are looking to have that installed by the spring and start doing the flights in the spring and the summer. So this is very near-term stuff.
And again, who are the key partners?
The whole OpenGen Consortium is involved in writing the test plans and in coming up with the experiments that will be flown and basically defining what data need to be collected. Verizon has donated graciously some spectrum that we will be able to operate on, and I believe Nokia donated the radios. So it's been quite a team effort.
Does Newware do any validation of standards or products?
We've done a number of standards validations. We've been working on parachute recovery system quite a lot. And a new one we're doing is the durability and reliability testing. But on the parachute recovery system, over the years, we've done Indemnis. We've worked with Flytrex on their system. They're a delivery company that's, I believe, working down in North Carolina. But they use the drone rescue systems, parachute recovery system. AVSS is a Canadian group. We've done several of their validations, and we continue to work with them and will in the future with the new parachute recovery system standard, which is just becoming updated, and it will include some more deployments. So it actually will be a higher bar to pass, but AVSS is excited about doing that. And they've got some really impressive technology things in the pipeline. They've got some really, really neat technology that folks should really take a look at. It's important to remember that the qualification of the system is done at the system level. So it's the airplane and the parachute recovery system. So sometimes you'll have a parachute recovery system manufacturer come to you, as with like AVSS. They've done, I think, 3 different vehicles, separate vehicles, but all with the AVSS parachute. Or sometimes you have an operator like Flytrex bring their vehicle with someone else's parachute recovery system on it. So it's always something new, always interesting.
In addition to drone recovery and safety systems, is Newware validating any other standards?
Well, when it comes to like doing standards compliance testing, you need a standard to be compliant to. And there's just really not a lot of standards that the FAA have accepted for UAS. The parachute recovery system standard is one of them. The durability and reliability has a standard as well that we're just starting to see people start to want to use. So the certification bases for some of the applicants have just been published in the Federal Register as final rule. So I think you'll see them coming out and doing testing in the very near future to show that they are compliant with that standard, which was designed to really be compliant with the durability and reliability process.
Is the test site involved in any urban air mobility initiatives?
So Newware was the lead on the NASA vertiport automation system project. And what we did was put together kind of the dream team of folks that could put together first of all, a trade study investigating, what the lay of the land was, if you will, in vertiports and in advanced air mobility, and then looked at a concept of operations for a system that you would use to basically automate your vertiport. And this was all at what NASA would call a UML4 level. And so they've got different levels of urban air mobility capabilities. And so UML4 it's a high density, it's a future view of how things are going to look, or as we would call a vision ConOps. It's like 2030 is when the NASA timeline has UML4 kind of coming into play. And it's a very highly automated, very dense operation, several takeoffs and landings per minute. So quite a busy place. And so there's a lot of machine to machine communication that needs to take place. Humans are managing exceptions. They are not controlling. They are managing exceptions that the automation system flags as needing human attention, but most of it is actually done by the automation. So we developed the ConOps software architecture and a set of software requirements as well, and even implemented them in model-based systems engineering so that they can be basically linked up with other model-based systems engineering implementations of ConOps, like the NASA Urban Air Mobility ConOps and the FAA ConOps, and basically tried out in simulation and modeling and simulation. So unfortunately, didn't get to go and write any code to build the vertiport automation system, but the requirements were fully vetted as part of that model-based systems engineering. So we're looking forward to perhaps getting some follow-on work where we would actually start building vertiports.
On April 25th through the 28th, AUVSI will host Exponential, the largest industry trade show and conference on uncrewed systems. You're going to be speaking at 2 sessions. What are your topics?
I'm on a couple panels. I'm on a panel that's discussing automation. Phil Cannell, the chair of the ASTM F-38 committee, which is the UAS committee, is going to moderate this panel. And we call it Autonomy Enabling Future Operations Beyond Visual Line of Sight. So it should get some attention, particularly after the Beyond Visual Line of Sight ARC, report was released and whatnot. So we got a good, really strong lineup with Mark Blanks from Wing and Adam Morrison, Andy Latcher from NASA, myself. So it should be a good time.
Who would be most interested in attending this session?
Well, I think anybody that's interested in, how autonomy is going to play a role. And frankly, the AUVSI's theme is assured autonomy. So I think that the audience is going to be kind of predisposed to wanting to see this. But, automation, autonomy, these systems that, allow humans to safely supervise or manage more and more vehicles. So it's changing the role of the human pilot. It's changing the human role away from control and more manager. And so that autonomy is, how do you certify that autonomy? How do you show that it is safe? And more importantly to me, I think is, how do you show that that autonomy isn't going to fail in some unusual way? Because many people look at automation or autonomy as a safety mitigator. You take the human out of the loop and you remove all those sources of pilot error. It sounds like a great idea, but I think that we do a really good job of counting up every instance of pilot error. What we do not do is we do not count up every time the pilot actually saves something, or that where a human decision actually, removes risk from an operation. So we do a great job of counting things against humans. We do a less well job of showing, where humans prevent something from happening. And I know that that's hard to do. So I'm not casting any stones at the way we do our safety analyses, but I think that one of the things that we need to think about is when that role of the pilot changes, how do we make ourselves comfortable that the automated functions that are replacing the pilot or the autonomy that's replacing the human is not going to fail in some kind of unusual, unforeseen way.
You're also participating on a session on 5G.
Well, the 5G panel is going to be led by one of the lead scientists from the OpenGen Consortium. So we're going to have a discussion, I would imagine, about what we're doing in the consortium, specifically what is going on in the corridor up in New York and the implementation of the 5G test segment that I mentioned previously. That should be interesting as well.
Newware will also have a booth in the exhibit hall with a number of other central New York partners and startups. Want to tell us about it?
So yeah, Newware will be at booth 1761, and we'll have a lot of the Central New York folks there. Many of the startups from Genius New York, which is our local tech incubator, which is actually in downtown Syracuse, right across from our offices in downtown Syracuse. So a number of those startups are in the UAS industry. Actually, Genius New York started off being almost completely UAS. Now there are some additional people that are doing more. It's gone beyond unmanned aircraft system into more of autonomy and automated systems. So that should be interesting to meet some of those folks. Always interesting stories coming out of Genius New York.
What are you looking forward to most at this year's Exponential?
Oh, I want to get back in person. This has been difficult. I do a lot of work, with standards development organizations and groups that had really been used to working remotely most of the time before the pandemic, but always you'd have these anchor meetings, maybe once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, where you'd see everybody, you'd be able to kind of like, reinvest that social capital that we have. And that held you across the many meetings on Zoom in between. And when we stopped doing that, we kind of lost that ability to recharge the social capital account, and we just kept drawing it down. And, I have seen where, groups are becoming less and less effective. And so I'm really excited to get back in person and start to go and reinvest some of that social capital and get back seeing people, not having to worry about putting together another Zoom call, to follow up on something. You just go meet them after the coffee break or something like that. I mean, those conveniences, that were how so much work got done, before we just lost. And so I found that we've been becoming less and less effective. And I'm looking forward to getting back in person.
What advice would you give to attendees so they can maximize the value or the experience of attending Exponential?
I would say walk the floor. And I do a bad job of this because I always seem to get, waylaid by going to this paper or going to that panel. And walking the floor is a lot of fun because you get to see a lot of people, you get to meet a lot of folks, you get to see a lot of new ideas, and you get to have that. Sometimes you make those connections that you would have failed to make just sitting around reading papers or doing Zoom meetings. You get out in person, you meet people, you go and you see new ideas. That cross-pollination, is so important. And so I would say walk the floor, go to some papers, don't go to stuff go to stuff that is exciting to you, but that you don't know, you're not an expert in it, because that's where you're going to learn something. And, guilty, I don't do a great job of this. Sometimes I'll say, oh, I know those people on that panel and I want to go see their panel. And then I'm sitting in the audience and I'm like, I know that, you're wrong there, and it's like, I didn't learn anything. And I like learning new things. So I always have to force myself to go do something new, try something new, go find some new area that I'm fascinated about, but, I may not be an expert. That's where I want to go. Walk the floor and find something new. Those would be my 2 pieces of advice.
And for my final question, Andy, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I think that the future of the drone industry is bright. I think that there's been a number of things that have happened in the recent past that really point to a bright future. We've seen the operations over people rule, the remote ID rule get published. They will go into effect soon, and we'll start to see the benefits of people declaring compliance with both of those. The Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee, which Newware was a part of, their recommendations were just released to the FAA very recently, and the FAA will take those recommendations and start working on rulemaking for Beyond Visual Line of Sight. And that is I've heard it referred to as the Holy Grail. I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but it is a huge enabler for the economic employment of these systems. There are other things that need to happen as well. We need to start looking at a new way of having flights approved, not VFR, not IFR, visual flight rules or instrument flight rules, but a type of flight rule that has the access that IFR provides with the flexibility that VFR provides. And many people have called those, some people have called them digital flight rules. We talked about them in the ARC report as autonomous flight rules, but whatever you call them, they are more flexible than IFR, but still give you that access to airspace that is so necessary for having an economic return on your investment. So I really think that the future is bright. There's all signs, if I had one of those like 8 balls from the 70s, I turn it upside down and say, all signs point to yes. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think things are working in a positive way. I think we'll see big things in the future.
That's it for episode 356 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Andy Thurling of the Northeast UAS Airspace Integration Research Alliance. I want to thank Andy for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Newware or want to connect with Andy, check out the website at NUAIR.org. And remember, on April 25th through the 28th, AUVSI will present Exponential 2022 in Orlando, Florida. It's the largest global gathering for the drone and uncrewed systems industry, and you're going to want to be a part of it. Go to exponential.org for more information or to register. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.